So, welcome to Fabcast episode 7, The Luxury of Longevity. What if the most sustainable swag is simply the stuff people never throw away? So, we ask ourselves, do brands fundamentally misunderstand what sustainable swag really means? And where are they getting it wrong? Like, are they over indexing on material and missing the bigger picture? Where do you see the biggest disconnect between intention and outcome?
Well, first of all, the answer to the question is yes. They fundamentally misunderstand what sustainable swag is. And the reason is, or why they're getting it wrong, in my experience, is because there's a disconnect between reality and requirements. And what I mean by that is, so if reality says in the real world, outside of, company procurement, sustainability means materials, it means, country of origin, it means, low carbon footprint, and on and on and on, is as consumers, we're fairly uneducated, I think, into the real definition of what constitutes sustainable. Then we bring that kind of consumer lack of understanding to work, and work has a bunch of procurement or buying requirements that force us to be certified in things like EcoVadis or fair labor, or clean water, or 1% for the planet, or go plant 10 trees for every t-shirt you buy. And then it just becomes this kind of arms race of what I really believe is greenwashing. And and so procurement says, as an organization, we stand for these things. We stand for the planet, and there's a certification that we can buy, and we can make a requirement down through our supply chain so that everybody complies. And then inevitably, everyone just ignores whether it's actually useful in the category of swag. And so then it turns into higher prices, like you said, over indexing on materials, missing the bigger picture, when really what someone should do is say, if sustainability is imperative and swag is imperative, then we should take the necessary steps to treat something that's imperative instead of treating it as inconsequential or non-essential or throwaway or this or that. And so I think fundamentally, swag in and of itself needs to be redefined. And I think sustainability should just be built into the equation such that we don't have to go incur a whole host of ancillary costs to prove that we know how to do the right thing. And I know companies just want to be able to say, oh, they're certified. It doesn't mean they know what the right thing is. And so if we sat down with design thinkers, literally people who know how to work through a problem with critical thinking skills, then I think we have a shot of being more sustainable in the process and the category and procurement and branding and everything at large. And I know I just went on a windbag, but this is probably one of the biggest problems in swag, kind of creating a reputation where it's sustainable all the time, not just some of the time.
Right. And so to your point, like I always think like sustainability is as much about, emotional value versus material and certifications because something that is eco can still be ultimately wasteful. So what we're talking about in this issue is what role or the role that desirability plays in sustainability. So the real issue, maybe not alone in terms of how it's made, but whether it's worth keeping. Is it usefulness? Is usefulness enough, or does it need something more?
Well, so I love when we go through monthly, the kind of sourcing process, and I've observed that most often Carlo will find what I would describe as either the most interesting or the most sustainable because the usability of it or the attention to detail that went into the design, whether it's the materials or what have you. And I just feel like Carlo's lenses are not focused on promo or swag. It's the focus and the view is much broader. And then the question is, how can we take those things and actually make them in a way that works for the business of promo? And I feel like that is a real unique aspect of Fabulist because we're not viewing it as what the industry would prescribe. And Lori, I know, you've been in fashion and you've obviously been around the promo industry for a long time. And so you bring yet another set of filters, which definitely leans more towards fashion. And then I'm kind of the angry elf who just is so
Mhm.
annoyed that we take all these great things and a factory overseas finds a way to knock it off and the quality isn't there and therefore the sustainability isn't there and then it just becomes somewhat disappointing. But when you guys present ideas, I never feel that way.
So in your view, worth keeping, Carlo, is what?
Well, I always think in terms of effectiveness. Would I rather get 6 items in a year that are okay or mediocre or one great item? That one great item that I get, I'm going to remember for the full year and probably into the next year.
Yeah, so it goes to, when we're talking about our luxury issue, you kind of answered this next point that we were looking at together that, a lot of people think luxury and swag, well, we can't afford it. But
Mm.
even though it can sound excessive, um, it can often be the more responsible choice because of what you're talking about right now. In this context, like if we define luxury as price, quality, design, is it about spending more or is it just simply choosing better to end up being that one item that you want to keep as opposed to the 6 items that you threw away? Because those 6 items, if you add up their value versus that one item that you keep and made an impression, and it was worth something and the company spent the same amount of money, but we don't just have to flood the market with stuff. We were talking about this the other day, like luxury and swag. Is there a place for it? Well, yeah,
Hmm.
there can be a place for it. So is it just opening the mind and going, consider this? Like in our issue right now, the DHL example, the Rego example, where, Being London Bags collaborated and created something and really made a mark in the marketplace.
Yeah, I think you're right. It's luxury is more about how open-minded you can be, I believe, because we're not trying to pigeonhole luxury as a brand. It doesn't have to be LVMH, it doesn't have to be Cartier. I think it's just an elevated experience of what we would define as luxurious in the moment. And I had a conversation the other day with a young man who grew up in Michigan, and his father's an oil painter, not as a profession, but as a hobby. And he took his son to Kleinburg, Ontario, to the museum to see the Group of Seven.
Hmm.
And their work is magnificent. And so I could ask, would licensing a piece of art from the Group of Seven and applying that piece of art to a high quality leather good that could be used as a tool to motivate people to maybe donate to a good cause, and that would be a reward for doing that. I don't know, is that luxurious? Maybe. It depends really, I think, on what you're trying to accomplish and what's going to be most effective, like Carlos said, because I know if someone took the time to drip campaign to me once every other month of the year, could they find a way to do it luxuriously? Or would they just not be open-minded and say, we don't have the budget to think through that. We don't have the wherewithal to just let a designer think about it.
Yeah, so it sort of boils down to what symbolically luxury means for people and how they define it. Because, like you said, what makes somebody feel luxurious what is luxurious doesn't necessarily have to be a luxury brand. It is just the thought, the intention, the quality. It is all those things. So if we said, what does luxury do differently? Um, because we said, how do we define luxury? Is it price, quality, design, or something else? It's all of those things. And it's
Mhm.
also this idea that, like you just said, when somebody receives it, they feel pampered. They feel that it was a luxurious item. And it doesn't have to be the most expensive.
Let me
Yeah.
interrupt you because this is what we talked about the other day. So, during the opening of Luxury Cat in London on Gordon Ramsay's documentary, there was
Mm-hmm.
the gold, you know, cat.
Lucky cat. Yeah. The lucky cat little item. Yeah.
Okay, so that and everybody can watch the show themselves and see it. Would you define that item as luxury?
I would.
Me
I would
too.
def I would define it as luxury because it was a little kitsch, something that represented a moment, a luxurious event. It was tied to it in such a thoughtful way that now it became this iconic keepsake. So we say keep worthy. It was in a luxurious setting, so now it brought back a memory of that. So it did make somebody feel luxurious.
I
Yeah.
agree. Imagine
Yeah.
if someone hadn't thought through that, and I think they happened onto that accidentally. You could tell
Mhm.
that they were
Yes, because they
surprised.
were like, holy, holy crap, all these things are disappearing.
Yeah,
What?
we don't have the budget for this. But imagine if someone else, imagine if a promotional products person was asked to work on that project. And I'm not saying that maybe a promotional products person actually wasn't, but I'm just saying that maybe the majority, 80% would recommend a Birkin bag.
Yeah, or a coaster or something just like common to the hospitality restaurant industry without giving it that, extra because that's branding and that's thoughtfulness and that's intention and that's we talk about the emotional impact of something and that's emotion.
Yeah.
That is generating an emotional connection to a brand. So it actually brings us to then we can talk about how luxury, what do they do differently that increases the likelihood that something will stay in somebody's life. It's a
Uh,
little bit about what, Gordon Ramsay did in the opening of Lucky Cat. It's the choice that they make on all these little items. And we're talking about a collection of symbols because swag can be a symbol, the collection of items in our lives. Carlo, just like your story about when you first came to Canada and you were on a British Airways. Was it a British Airways flight?
BOAC, British Overseas
BOAC.
Air Corporation.
And what you got, right?
Yes.
Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, as we were coming to Canada, my father was telling the flight attendant our story. And at the end of the flight, she came and gave us some swag items. But this is swag items. I'm going to date myself because this is in the 60s that are real quality items. And I have them to this day. And I think that's what it comes down to is getting a sense of quality in this item. So to give you an example, I went to see the Armani exhibition at the Guggenheim, and I remember I was so floored by one exhibit, and that exhibit was the purse collection. From 15 feet away, because of course everything is cordoned off, you could feel the quality and craftsmanship. And to this day, I mean, I saw this in 2000s, and to this day, I still remember the quality and the craftsmanship of those bags. So you can imagine if somebody in the promotion uh, industry just takes at least 25% of that thinking and applies it to their item, how much further the communication will go.
Yeah, and it's going back to the Lucky Cat little icon or the item that you received on the plane as a child, because they are emotional evokers. And the tie-in to what is being promoted is a real tie-in. It's not like just here's a pen with our logo on it. It was thought of so that there was a real link to what the experience was, to what the item was, to what that memorabilia was, right? To the item. Just like the DHL when they took all the flags and the signage and turned them into these bags, and they were unique, one of a piece.
Because it has provenance.
It has provenance, it has a cash to it. Yes, it's all these things. So if we redefine sustainability, given what we're talking about with one metric, would it simply be, or could it simply be, will they keep it? Do they keep it? How could brands start evaluating that before they commit to a product? Is there a proxy for stay power during the decision-making process? To your point, Jamie, a lot of these things are like, just get me something. Are people really thinking about the stay power um, and evaluating it by, we talk about think, feel, do, but will they keep it?
Yeah, that's the ultimate, right? Will they keep it? Will they use it? Will they, be able to go back in time to the 60s and feel joyous about a journey to a new home? The role that those mementos, those collectibles, those luxurious gifts that were presented to your family on a flight, that's luxurious. The whole, even the flight attendant, presenting those to
Mhm.
your dad.
So can you imagine now if that airline still existed? So when I'm trying to book a flight, Jamie, who would I look at first?
Right, because if they did everything, if their booking system was done to that level of luxuriousness, and it doesn't have to be expensive.
Hmm.
It just the thought has to be luxurious. And I think if that, Lori, is what stay power is, I would say then swag I mean, it has a lot of stay power if it's designed and if it's thoughtful and if it's all the things. But I think, especially here in the US, it feels like everyone's rushing, they're chasing, they don't get time to plan, they don't have the resources available to truly work with a designer, and they take what's off the shelf. And, I've heard so many times people say we're not going to slap a logo on it. And that is just, kind of what I would describe as conversation to make people feel better about what they do for a living, because that's exactly what they end up doing. I mean, the biggest companies in this industry's advertising is your logo here.
Yeah, exactly. And you know what? And I think that going back to luxury, when we ask the question to the promo industry, to our industry, what can we learn from luxury? It's not the fact that you have to spend more. Yes, we can look at quality, but it doesn't really, that's not the defining factor. The defining factor is the keep worthiness of it and really thoughtfully, because luxury brands, by nature of the um, maybe unique relationship they have with their clients, it's not such a huge demographic, right? So they can afford, just factored into their prices. Well, I'm not even going to say they can afford, they can't afford. This is the mindset. They can't afford to not signal to their clients, be intentional with their clients, be thoughtful, create even swag, or everything has to be thought about the detail. And that is by virtue of what makes them a luxury brand, because they do care about all these details, right? So if we learn one thing, and it is just to care, even within our price points, how can we apply a little of that thinking into the promo industry? So choosing fewer better, what would it signal about a brand externally and internally? Do employees and customers actually feel the difference? I think yes, for the luxury brands, if we think about how they operate and their mindset, and how does that connect to the brand trust or even their culture? So it's that luxury thinking in terms of creating. I'm not saying all luxury brands do this, but a lot of luxury brands are like Stella McCartney is a perfect
Mm.
example of a brand that is really, in that space. And definitely with Earth Day around the corner, she's really in that space of looking at eco-friendly sustainability, sustainable techniques, and so on and so forth. And we do bring a lot of those up and reference those examples in this issue of the Fabulous. So, guys out there, have a read through. I think they're very interesting in terms of what brands are doing in luxury and sustainability, in their use of inks, in their use of textures, in their use of faux textures and fabrics and discovery. So yeah. So for brands wanting to shift from volume to value, where should they start, Jamie? What do you think?
So brands in this case are the end user customers, the buyer of merchandise, not the luxury brand itself, correct?
Correct. Like I'm saying, what can our general customer, even the promo industry, but even the brands that are buying, is there a shift they need to make from volume to value in terms of what they're buying? Or,
Yeah. Yeah, and yes, and I think it's complicated because I think it's going to require the category managers who sit in the procurement teams to really have to learn more about the category that they're buying. And then they're going to have to, I think, sit and learn more about what their stakeholders are trying to accomplish. And then I think they're going to need to bring supply chain partners in that have diverse skills, not just distribution, not just warehousing, not just fulfillment, but like the capability to design, think through a challenge. And then I think the kind of the scope of the way the request for proposal for this category works is going to need an overhaul. I think it's really got to be systemically reflected in the way procurement organizations, um, send requests out, which, in my experience is typically find and replace office products and replace with promotional products and send to vendor list for bid. And there's nothing thoughtful nor luxurious in that. And I'm not blaming the people that do it. I just don't think they have any means to understand that there's another way that could possibly accomplish the same or better results than they're getting now. And I think Fabulous that I mean that's a big reason why we do this is I think we really want to bring change to what swag should be swaggy.
yeah.
There should be swagger with swag. It should be more of the advertising specialty that can pull all of the levers if it's luxury or if it's sustainability or what it is. But I think when you think about the biggest volume of spend in this industry, the biggest companies with the biggest trademarks are the biggest culprits.
Mhm. Yeah, and sometimes, I mean, sometimes procuring an item, a promotional item, is really just a practical. We do need pens. We need pens that we can sign with. We do need pads. I mean, there are a lot of items that are just staples that, can be necessary, for sure. And we're not saying that everything needs to be, analyzed with a fine-tooth comb, but as an industry as a whole and as a procuring as a whole, like where is there opportunity to be more thoughtful, even in those small things, I would add. But,
Agreed.
that being said, so if we said, is there, because it is a mindset, right? If there was one practical change that some is easy because people don't like change and they don't want to be bothered with it, is there a practical, easy change that somebody can make immediately to just open up to doing things better or different?
One thing I just want to say is that I think, a lot of people think this swag procurement is treated like advertising's poor sibling,
Hmm.
but it really isn't. Because when you look at the budgets of some of these departments that are in charge of swag, they're quite big. So, it's got to be treated with, I think, within the company with more respect in terms of what are we doing intention, as opposed to we just need a pen with our logo on it or a t-shirt with our logo on it. I think,
Yeah.
it's just educating the client that they're spending a lot of time and money on this and that they should think it through more thoroughly.
Right, because they're creating it anyways. And guys, by the way, stay tuned because our next issue is going to be about that. It's going to be about how brand identity gets in the way sometimes of identifying with your clients. So if you want to just put your logo on something, let's think if that is the best way to reach the customer, to reach your employees. Is it really, what is the messaging? What are the more meaningful choices you can make, even within those day-to-day things, to make those um, more meaningful, more useful, more keep worthy? This is Earth Day, so we're talking about luxury and sustainability. It's around the corner. How can brands avoid sustainability theater and make more meaningful choices?
Mm.
Are there red flags of performative sustainability and swag? What does doing it right actually look like? I think we've talked about some of these things already, um, in the sense of, will somebody keep it? Will they throw it
Yeah.
out? You know,
I have a theory on this.
yes, sir, Jamie.
My theory is, um, when you ask the question of like, what's doing it right actually look like? Like, what if you looked at it, what does that look like? And I think people who have brands, companies that actually have brands, which is an archetype and a voice and a color system and topography and all the elements that make a brand that give it its personality. I would say you start there. What is the brand like? What does it look like? How does it behave out in public? Does it immediately have some sort of materials spasm where now the brand looks like a bamboo forest?
Hmm.
And now all the tchotchkes are bamboo because someone said it's sustainable. Meanwhile, it looks absolutely absurd for one particular company or another. And so I always would default to brand guidelines and brand strategies and brand systems are more than just a set of logos and color codes, and maybe really dig in there, and that would reduce the theater because you'd have a real set of meaningful guidelines that would constrain you from the world as your oyster. And I think that would be really helpful. But I think that's a technique again where it's like, procurement now needs to really understand what the brand people are doing. And then the design people really need to understand what the intention of the brand is. And then we can go make things that all work and feel like they should, right down to when, the flight attendant knows that they are playing a role in a family's life that is kind of significant in that moment.
Yeah. But you know what? And I think we'll leave this for another conversation for the next time around. And I think the brand should always be there. But how is the brand presented? And if you're running a campaign, for a specific reason, how do you get that messaging across? How does the campaign take precedence over slapping a big logo with your colors on something? Because that may not always be the right choice. So doing it right, what does it actually look like? I think like we'll leave that. That'll be our
Yeah.
next conversation because there are a lot of subtleties, and there's a lot of specificity that comes along with that. And we have to think about what we're trying to accomplish, who we're talking to. And if you're running a campaign and the brand is running the campaign, does it work with the brand? Is it relatable? There's just so many things, but we'll do that next time.
Yeah.
Um, so if there was one filter every brand should apply before approving swag, and again, we're still talking luxury. So what is it? For us right now, it's in this sense of being luxurious. Will they keep it? If the answer is maybe, what should you do about it? What happens when brands start saying no more often? Will they keep it? No. Oh, I don't know. Maybe they will. Maybe they won't.
Yeah. I might even say, would I covet it? Would I want to steal it? Like sometimes when you're given things, right? Like it can be awkward because you didn't ask for it and maybe you don't even want it. But if you do that and it creates this kind of, especially in business, where there's maybe some expectation of reciprocity, where I give you something and in turn at some point I'm going to ask you for something. If there's any hint of that, that is just not that's not luxurious at all. It's manipulative. But if something was just so well done and it met the moment and it was appropriate, um, and I was presented with it, I would respect it. And I might, put it on my shelf because that moment was important. So I think it's really different for a lot of people. But what I would also say is when you can't get that deep on it, when someone just says, why do we even care? Like it's just a pen. No, no, actually it's not. It's a moment where you get to, as a company, stand up for what you believe in. And so even though like inconsequentially pen, the pen is the most popular and the most prolific promotional product ever created, and there's some amazing innovators in the writing instrument space who do sustainability beyond, pair. And I just think, this industry's got so many great stories to tell, but it's not a great storytelling industry. And then maybe, maybe that's really what we're trying to bring to the table. And that's really what a fabulist is, right? It's a storyteller.
Mm-hmm.
So my feeling is, the filter is go I'm gonna cheat off of Carlos' homework is like, is it effective and does it have meaning with the audience?
And is it desirable? Like luxury, I think what they have right, luxury is that it's a desirable product. It's a desirable product. In the case of the little lucky cat, it symbolizes something. So yeah, all that being said, it was nice to connect today, and until next time.